There are an assortment of reasons leading up to a film's release that make it obvious to audiences it's destined to fail at the box office. Many of the biggest box office flops in the previous year were from celebrated directors and featured a stacked cast full of beloved actors, and yet, it wasn't much of a surprise to see their box office numbers were less than ideal. Films like Megalopolis and Joker, Folia Dux were once highly anticipated by critics and audiences as a director's passion project and promising sequel, respectively. However, the closer it came to the films being released, the more obvious it became that they wouldn't be well received. Many of the other box office failures that were no surprise were surrounded by discouraging conversations detailing messy productions and constantly delayed release dates. Early reviews of such films were also mostly negative and were a telltale sign that much wouldn't change once they were made available for the general public to see. 10. Fly Me to the Moon, 2024. An underwhelming story that didn't catch audiences' attention. Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson stand together against a fence in Fly Me to the Moon. Loosely based on the Apollo 11 mission, Fly Me to the Moon follows a marketing specialist, Scarlett Johansson, teaming up with a NASA launch director, Channing Tatum, to orchestrate a fake moon landing in case the real mission winds up failing. Fly Me to the Moon was initially set to be released on Apple TV+, but positive test screenings prompted it to have a theatrical release instead. Unlike other recent box office flops, the reviews of Fly Me to the Moon weren't entirely negative. Many complimented Johansson and Tatum's chemistry and comedic abilities. However, the film's rough blend of a historical drama and a romantic comedy led to an underwhelming story that audiences simply weren't interested in watching in theaters. With a production budget of $100 million, Fly Me to the Moon earned $42 million. 9. Harold and the Purple Crayon, 2024. It was reviewed negatively and in competition with anticipated films. Actor Zachary Levi as Harold in Harold and the Purple Crayon. Based on the 1955 children's book of the same name, Harold and the Purple Crayon follows its titular child into adulthood, Zachary Levi. The film was released toward the end of summer, following the success of other family movies like Inside Out 2 and Despicable Me 4. The success of such films continued for months after their initial release, showing early signs that Harold and the Purple Crayon would likely struggle at the box office. In addition to fighting against films targeted at a similar audience, Harold and the Purple Crayon was also in competition with anticipated films like Deadpool and Wolverine and Trap. Against a $40 million budget, the film grossed $32 million and earned largely negative reviews from critics. The poor reviews and tough competition at the box office, combined with audiences' general lack of interest in the older IP, resulted in a less than surprising performance at the box office. 8. Here, 2024. A creative but isolating premise had general audiences disinterested. Tom Hanks and Robin Wright in Here. The premise of Robert Zemeckis' Here is ambitious and had many people excited to see the director reunite with the film's stars, Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, decades after the release of Forrest Gump. The setup of the film, which depicts the events of a single spot of land over multiple decades, was enough to intrigue audiences looking for fresh ideas and innovation following the release of big franchises and IP movies. However, Zemeckis' unique ideas failed to draw in a substantial crowd, which led to the film performing poorly at the box office, earning just over $13 million on a roughly $45 million budget. The simplicity and restrictions of the filmmaking choices in Here weren't appealing to general audiences. On Rotten Tomatoes, Here's audience score of 59% isn't terrible, but it means the film's quick drop from the top 10 theatrical releases in the first few weeks of its release isn't shocking. 7. Argylle, 2024. Audiences weren't interested after learning about its mediocrity. Ellie holding a bomb in Argylle. Acting as a standalone spin-off in the Kingsman franchise, Argylle had the potential to be an entertaining film that mixed comedy with espionage and drew audiences to the theaters for a fun time. Argylle has a stacked cast with actors like Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, Henry Cavill, and Bryan Cranston. In the film, a writer, Howard, finds herself caught up in the world of espionage after discovering the events in her book mirror those in the real world. Argylle is, without a doubt, entertaining, especially in the first half of the film. It's humorous and energetic but loses steam due to its unnecessarily lengthy runtime. Argylle is overstuffed with plot twists, creating a plot that quickly becomes confusing and exhausting. This combination of negative takeaways was made apparent early on in the film's theatrical run, leaving many unsurprisingly disinterested. 6. Borderlands, 2024. A video game adaptation passionate fans didn't appreciate. Cate Blanchett as Lilith looking over her shoulder in a bar in Borderlands 2024 image via Lionsgate. Video game adaptations are tricky to pull off, as any sort of deviation from the source material must be beneficial to the whole product. Unfortunately for Borderlands, the changes from the original game series resulted in an abysmal box office performance. With a budget of roughly $120 million, Borderlands grossed $33 million. Additionally, the film, which sits at a 10% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, earned largely negative reviews. Among the overwhelmingly negative reception to Borderlands, some reviews did praise Cate Blanchett's performance as the outlaw Lilith. Still, Blanchett, or the rest of the film's big names, wasn't enough to draw audiences to the theaters. Despite the film's failures, a positive outcome of its release was the increase in sales of the Borderlands games. On Steam, Borderlands 3 players doubled to about 12,000 following the release of Eli Roth's film, via Sports Illustrated.